Alongside Rory Boylan, I'm Nick Alberga for the post-trade deadline edition of Sportsnet's NHL Power Rankings. Rory, we start at number 10, where it's a team who doesn't have a goalie, but you like the Florida Panthers.
I mean, do they not have a goalie? We'll see. It was interesting that they put in Dreger 2 games in a row there, but they showed well, even though they lost to Tampa Bay in the game on Thursday night. I thought the Panthers showed pretty well. They outshot the Lightning pretty decisively. They didn't come away with the win. They did come away with a point, but I just think there is some things to like here for the Panthers. They definitely had the playoffs in mind with the moves that they were making at the deadline. Brandon Montour's no straight up replacement for Aaron Ekblad, of course, but it's that little bit of offense that you add back to the blue line, but especially the addition of Sam Bennett. You're not doing that thinking he's going to add a lot of offense to your team down the stretch, but he's going to make you tougher to play against when you get to the playoffs, and he's been productive in the playoffs for the Flames before, so you're hoping that pays off, and that's what it's all about for the Panthers right now, is getting that first playoff win since 1996.
That's right, and certainly the theme of this year's deadline was more so depth than an overhaul type move, with exception maybe the Anthony Mantha move as he goes, of course, now to the Washington Capitals. But we landed number 9. Speaking of the Capitals, one of their arch nemesis, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Still weird to me to see Jeff Carter in a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey.
It's so unexpected that was coming, and maybe we should have been thinking about him, because remember, he was kind of in trade rumors last year, didn't really want to go. Ron Hextall was talking pre-deadline about wanting to get a big physical forward, and Jeff Carter certainly fits that. But they were able to make an addition, an intriguing one. Maybe he adds you a couple goals, definitely adds some veteran presence, that physicality, and they didn't have to give up anything of note, really. They didn't have a first-round pick to give up at all. They didn't have to give up a high pick at all. They didn't have to move a top prospect, but they made an addition to keep up with what else was going on in that East Division.
Yeah, you need those type of guys, no doubt about that, in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, I talked about Anthony Mantha. I don't know about you. I like that fit a lot with the Washington Capitals, and that's where we're at number 8 here.
So interesting. I mean, I think Mantha has every opportunity now to finally explode as the goal scorer we've expected him to become. He hasn't hit 30 goals yet in his NHL career, but if he's going to do it, he's going to do it with these Washington Capitals, playing with better players. Probably should start getting more minutes than Jacob Vrana was getting with that team. But you do worry about the long term there, because Vrana, I personally am a fan of his. Really good 5-on-5 production. And of course, the draft pick that you're going to give up. But if you're Washington, you were looking for the cost certainty of Mantha, knowing that you can go forward with that contract, dealing with Ovechkin's in the offseason. Now you know what your core is going to cost for the next 2 or 3 years at least. But Mantha also gives you that upside of goal scoring that I don't really think Vrana had right now if you put him with better players, and that's what the Capitals needed. I was a little disappointed that they didn't add a goalie, though, at the deadline.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's probably the one thing I wonder about with the Washington Capitals, which is weird to say, of course, with Samsonov. But again, a lot's been dealt on that part so far this season. They have Vitek Vanacek as well. To number 7 we go, and the Winnipeg Jets, Rory.
They are just going to be a tough out. I would have liked to have seen them add a better defenseman, but traditionally, Kevin Cheveldayoff is a conservative general manager. He has taken cuts at the deadline before for that second-line center, but most of the time, he kind of stays on the sidelines. He did again this year. I can't fault him for not paying up, maybe paying too much that he was comfortable for, and if you couldn't find a defenseman with term that Matthias Ekholm would have presented, maybe it wasn't in their best interest to go after a rental. They did make a depth addition on the blue line, which is what all these kinds of teams tend to do. You're really relying on the depth that you have up front, maybe the deepest forward core in the North Division, although Toronto will give them a run for that when everybody is healthy and back and Lino's in the lineup. But you have that wild card of Connor Hellebuck. Nobody has a goalie as good, as sturdy as him. And as we saw in that Leafs-Jets game Thursday, this is the team that's going to give Toronto probably its toughest run in the North.
Yeah, we'll have the Maple Leafs are out of that game. I get what you're saying, though. I think, we have to stress net mining this time of year, and especially into the Stanley Cup playoffs. You need that bona fide stud, and any team with it, I think they're going to be trouble come playoff time. And with that, we go to the New York Islanders, who are one of the best defensive teams in hockey. They had Cal Palmieri and Travis Zajac.
One of the biggest winners of the deadline to me, because not only do you get the goal scorer in Palmieri that you needed to get with Andres Lee on the sidelines, you also get depth and versatility in Travis Zajac, and you gave up basically a first-round pick for both of those things. Normally, you're giving up a first-round pick for one of those elements. And so you get two players that you can move on with. You feel great about the depth. You already felt great about the defense, as you alluded to there in the goaltending. They just did everything they needed to do, didn't cost a whole heck of a lot, and the New York Islanders look even scarier today than they did before the deadline.
Number 5, this team will forever be my number 1 team on the power rankings this season until they lose, but you have them at number 5, and I get why. It's the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, I mean, if I'm ranking Stanley Cup contenders straight up and who I would pick, they're probably going to be higher on this list, but the dynamic list this is, you got to take into consideration the losses that they have been showing here lately. Columbus, I mean, there have been some bad games in here. Again, Florida outshot them pretty bad on Thursday night there. You look at the Steven Stamkos situation being put on LTI, and you pause for a little bit, but you do know that they're getting Nikita Kucherov back. You do know that they added maybe the best defenseman who was traded at the deadline in David Savard. Doesn't really matter if you think they paid too much for that first-round pick. That's what they're just trying to add depth, and they're trying to add the best players. And it was amazing that they were able to do it given their cap situation. But I think by the time we get to the playoffs, this team will settle into a groove again. It's just these rankings right now have to reflect a little bit of a cold stretch. The fact that Stamkos has been injured right now, and the fact that the 4 teams ahead of them, I think, are playing better hockey at this moment.
This fair. I'll take that answer. Number 4, we'll go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, Rory.
Yeah, Toronto. So they've been outside of the top 10 on this list at times this season, but I think they deserve a lot of credit for the run that they've been on here lately. Of course, without Freddie Anderson and net, Jack Campbell's been really strong. They've been doing it without the power play doing anything at all, with the depth scoring kind of being absent too. Like, they're really relying on their top 6, which is what this team is going to do anyways. But you gotta love the addition of Nick Foligno at the deadline. They probably needed a guy like that more than they needed another offensive upside guy like Taylor Hall would bring. You want the veteran presence. You want the defensive presence that Foligno brings. You got the depth on the blue line. Again, every contender is adding that. And you got the security in net with David Riddick, who I'm sure they're hoping doesn't play any playoff games, and he's the third string guy, but you just need him there in case. I think Toronto's starting to hit a groove here, and once that power play starts clicking again, look out, because they'll really take off.
As we speak, that vaunted power play is 1 for the last 42, and that could do this team in come playoff time. To number 3 we go, just a well-seasoned team all around. It's the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, I was hoping this was a team that would make a big splash at the deadline, but again, can't fault them if the prices just weren't right for them. Not a lot of weaknesses on this team. It never really made a lot of sense to me why they would trade a guy like Alex Nedeljkovic or any of those goalies, really, because you need that depth in this season especially. So they moved on with what they got. They have a really deep defense, of course. They have all the pieces in place that you need up front, and they've been matching really well against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they must have just figured they didn't need to pay up to get the players who were out there to make themselves better. It's still a team, I think, that has a just opening window, right? They didn't have to push in a ton of chips this year. They can see how this thing goes, but right now they absolutely are one of the top Cup contenders.
And of course, they made a minor deal picking up Yanni Hakanpää in a deal for Hayden Fleury, but I'm told that they were looking at Josh Manson very, very closely. Didn't come to fruition, of course, here at the deadline, but maybe in the off season. Number 2, can't go wrong with this, the Vegas Golden Knights.
Another team probably would have liked to have added a little bit more at the deadline than they did, but you're capped out. Of course, they were rumored to be in on Ryan Getzlaf, which would have been incredible to see how that would have worked and how he would have fit in with that team. But I think anyways that, they didn't need to do a heck of a lot. They didn't have a lot of cap space. They didn't have anybody who they really wanted to move off the roster. So you add a little bit of scoring depth up front, but this is all about the guys they already had. It's all about the Mark Stone, the Shea Thid, or the both of the goalies that they have. I mean, depth everywhere in this lineup. And it's going to be really interesting to me. I hope we actually do get the Vegas-Colorado series in the second round, because it would be absolutely incredible. To me right now, those are the top 2 teams in the league. Really, really closely matched up.
I was on the record for saying Matthias Janmark is one of the more underrated deadline pickups than will prove to be, which leads us to number 1, a team I think could lose to the St. Louis Blues in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Shout out producer Drew. It's the Colorado Avalanche.
St. Louis is such an interesting team to me, because if they do get in, look out. No, you can't bet against them, right? Anything can happen with that team. Colorado, though, I mean, again, I think still too much is made of the top line being all they've got. That's not true. There's a lot more depth in that forward group than just that top line, and it is the best line in hockey right now. You have, of course, a really good young dynamic defense, and you got some snarl back there too. The concern at the moment for the Colorado Avalanche is Philip Grubauer going on the COVID list. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks. That's why you got Devin Dubnyk at the deadline, right? So now we get to see him come in and try and get back on track after a bit of a disastrous season there in San Jose. Hopefully he gets some confidence back and kind of steadies things here. But Colorado could slip back a little bit, but I think you're expecting Grubauer to be back by the time the playoffs are here. And to me, Colorado is the best team in the NHL right now. Vegas is close. Tampa Bay would be close as well, but they've been so hot for so long. Not a lot of weaknesses on this team. They are my number one without a doubt.
You know what, Rory? You did pretty well this week. I know I pick you apart on a weekly basis, but this week not so. Like the only team maybe I would have added was the Boston Bruins. I thought maybe that was their best effort of the season in that win against the Islanders on Thursday night. And that guy wearing 71, Taylor Hall, surprise, scores in that game. How about that?
Yeah, Taylor Hall, awesome pickup, I thought, for the Bruins at the deadline. Of course, didn't have to give up a heck of a lot. I bet you he scores more goals against the Buffalo Sabres the rest of the way than he scored for the Buffalo Sabres. Honorable mention on this week's list for sure are the Boston Bruins, because you also get Tuukka Rask back in the net, which was kind of the gray area. What is this team doing? Are they going to have their goalie back or not? They have him back now, which makes you feel a heck of a lot better about the Boston Bruins. So it would not surprise me if they're able to leapfrog teams like Florida or Pittsburgh on this list next week.
Yeah, my only wonder with Boston, of course, is the back end. Was Mike Riley a big enough pickup? I thought they maybe should have gone after a guy like Rasmus Ristolainen, but here we were at Taylor Hall, and they're trying to address their depth needs, right?
Yeah, and Rasmus Ristolainen, again, that's a guy with a little bit of term on his contract, and not a lot of those guys moved, right? So it was just what was the market? It was really all about the rentals, and if that defenseman wasn't out there, which he apparently wasn't for the Boston Bruins, it's hard to criticize these teams for not getting those guys, because it just wasn't that kind of a year.
That's fair. The stretch drive to the Stanley Cup playoffs are here. Thanks so much for this, Roy.
See you next week, Nick.
There you have it. That's Rory Boylan. I'm Nick Alberga. This has been another edition of Sportsnet's NHL Power Rankings.